Cleopatra VII, the real story behind the legend. Let's talk about one of the most famous names in history, Cleopatra. You hear that name and you instantly think of the eyeliner, the snake, maybe Elizabeth Taylor in that 1963 movie. She's remembered as the ultimate seductress, the woman who brought Rome to its knees. But that version of Cleopatra? It's mostly propaganda, written by her enemies. The real Cleopatra was way more interesting. She wasn't just a pretty queen with clever tricks. She was brilliant, multilingual, and politically ruthless. She survived in one of the most dangerous times in history and held onto her throne for over 20 years while Rome was swallowing up the Mediterranean. This is the real story of Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt. A queen who stood toe-to-toe with Julius Caesar, Mark Antony, and Octavian, the future Augustus. A woman who built her image so carefully that we're still fascinated by her 2,000 years later. Early life. Cleopatra VII. Cleopatra was born in 69 BCE in the city of Alexandria. This wasn't just any city. Alexandria was the jewel of the Mediterranean. It had the Lighthouse of Pharaohs, one of the 7 wonders of the world, and the famous Library of Alexandria, which tried to collect every book ever written. It was a place of philosophers, scientists, mathematicians, and traders. Cleopatra's family, the Ptolemies, had ruled Egypt since 305 BCE. They were descended from Ptolemy the Ferner, one of Alexander the Great's generals, who carved Egypt out as his own kingdom after Alexander's empire fell apart. The Ptolemies were Greek, not Egyptian, but they ruled as pharaohs. They built temples to the Egyptian gods, appeared in hieroglyphics, and styled themselves as successors to the pharaohs. But in private, the Ptolemies stayed Greek. They spoke Greek, lived in palaces filled with Greek art, and married their siblings. That last part wasn't unusual in Egyptian tradition, but for the Greeks it was scandalous. The point was to keep power locked inside the family. It also made the family incredibly violent. Ptolemaic history is basically a blood-soaked soap opera. Brothers murdered sisters, sisters poisoned brothers, mothers killed their sons to put their favorites on the throne. If you were born into this family, you were either going to end up ruling or end up dead. Cleopatra's father was Ptolemy XIII, nicknamed Auletes, which means the flute player. He wasn't respected. Ancient sources mock him as weak and more interested in music and parties than ruling. He even got kicked off the throne at one point and had to bribe Rome to get it back. He left Egypt heavily in debt and politically unstable. From the start, Cleopatra was different. Ancient writers like Plutarch emphasized that she had a magnetic personality. She wasn't said to be the most beautiful woman. In fact, coins show her with a prominent nose and strong features. But beauty wasn't what made her powerful. It was her intelligence, her charm, and her ability to make people feel like she was the smartest person in the room. And here's one of her biggest advantages: languages. Most of her dynasty only spoke Greek, but Cleopatra learned Egyptian. She also reportedly spoke as many as 9 languages, including Hebrew, Aramaic, and maybe Persian and Ethiopian dialects. That gave her a massive edge. Ambassadors couldn't trick her with translators. She spoke to people directly. That wasn't just rare for her time, it was extraordinary. Becoming pharaoh. When her father died in 51 BCE, Cleopatra, at just 18, became co-ruler with her younger brother Ptolemy XIII, who was about 10 years old. This was standard Ptolemaic practice. Officially, they ruled together as king and queen, and they were expected to marry even though they were siblings. But Cleopatra had no intention of being just a ceremonial partner. At first, she put her face on coins without her brothers, a bold move that said, "I'm in charge." But the court around Ptolemy XIII was run by powerful advisors who didn't like Cleopatra acting independently. By 49 BCE, she was forced out of Alexandria and went into exile in Syria. Most rulers in her position would have faded into history. A teenage queen kicked off her throne, outmaneuvered by palace advisors. But Cleopatra wasn't done. She raised a small army on Egypt's eastern border and prepared to fight her way back. She didn't have to wait long, because at that very moment, Rome's civil war came crashing into Egypt. Julius Caesar and the Rug Entrance. In 48 BCE, Rome's two most powerful men, in Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great, faced off at the Battle of Pharsalus in Greece. Caesar won. Pompey fled to Egypt, thinking he could find safety there because he had once helped Cleopatra's father. But the advisors around Ptolemy Theft made a huge mistake. They thought they could win Caesar's favor by killing Pompey. So they had him murdered as soon as he landed. They even presented Caesar with Pompey's severed head as a gift. Instead of being grateful, Caesar was horrified. Pompey was a Roman consul, once the most powerful man in the Republic. Killing him this way was dishonorable. Caesar was disgusted. And into that tense situation walked Cleopatra. Now, this is where one of the most famous stories of her life takes place. According to Plutarch, she smuggled herself into Caesar's palace, rolled up in a carpet or linen sack. The servants carried it in, unrolled it, and out popped Cleopatra. Imagine the drama of that moment. It wasn't just about meeting Caesar, it was about making an impression. And it worked. Caesar was charmed, not just by her looks, but by her wit and boldness. They became allies and soon lovers. With Caesar's support, Cleopatra went to war against her brother. The Alexandrian War broke out, with Caesar himself trapped in the palace, fighting street battles in Alexandria. At one point, part of the Library of Alexandria may have been destroyed in the fighting, though historians debate how much was actually lost. Eventually, Caesar's reinforcements arrived. Ptolemy the Theft fled, but he drowned in the Nile during the escape. Cleopatra won. She was restored to the throne, now ruling with her younger brother Ptolemy the Fatiguant, though in practice she was in charge. And then, in 47 BCE, she gave birth to a son, Ptolemy XV, better known as Caesarion, Little Caesar. Cleopatra claimed he was Caesar's child. The Romans never officially accepted that, but for Cleopatra, it was gold. Her son was both a Ptolemy and connected to Caesar himself. Cleopatra in Rome. Cleopatra didn't stay in Egypt. She went to Rome, living openly with Caesar in one of his villas. She brought Caesarion with her, and suddenly Rome was faced with a foreign queen calling herself a goddess, living with their leader. To the Roman elite, this was scandalous. Caesar was already seen as too powerful, maybe even aiming to be king. Having Cleopatra by his side only fueled the anger. Statues of her dressed as Isis were set up in Rome. She was living proof of Caesar's ambition to break tradition. But then, on the Ides of March in 44 BCE, Caesar was assassinated. Cleopatra suddenly went from being the partner of the most powerful man in the world to being an outsider in a hostile city. She quickly left Rome and returned to Egypt with her son. Antony enters the story. After Caesar's assassination, Rome spiraled into chaos again. His murderers, like Brutus and Cassius, claimed they saved the Republic. But Caesar's allies fought back, including a rising star named Mark Antony and Caesar's adopted heir Octavian. By 42 BCE, the assassins were defeated. Antony and Octavian split the Roman world between them. Antony took the east, which included Egypt, and that's when Cleopatra made her next big political move. Antony summoned her to the city of Tarsus in modern Turkey to explain her loyalty. Most rulers would have come humbly, bowing to Roman authority. Cleopatra did the opposite. She sailed up the river in a golden barge, dressed as the goddess Isis. Purple sails fluttered, silver oars sparkled, musicians played. Ancient writers describe the scene as dazzling, almost theatrical. Antony wasn't meeting a nervous queen. He was meeting a living goddess. And just like with Caesar, Cleopatra knew how to capture attention. She entertained Antony with feasts, wit, and charm. Soon, she won him over. They became lovers, and Antony followed her back to Alexandria. Partners in power, Cleopatra and Antony's relationship was more than romance. It was a political alliance. Antony needed Egypt's wealth to fund his campaigns. Cleopatra needed Antony's muscle to secure her throne and protect Caesarion's claim as Caesar's son. In Alexandria, they formed what some sources call a kind of royal court of luxury. They drank together, hunted together, and even created a private club known as the Inimitable Livers, where they competed in games, pranks, and feasting. This became fuel for Roman gossip. Writers painted Antony as a man who had lost his Roman discipline, seduced into excess by a dangerous foreign queen. But Cleopatra wasn't just distracting him with wine and laughter. She was strengthening Egypt. With Antony's support, she expanded her influence into parts of Syria and Cyprus. She also pushed her image harder than ever as the goddess Isis, protector of Egypt. For her people, this was powerful. She wasn't just a ruler, she was divine. In 40 BCE, Cleopatra gave birth to twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene. A few years later, she had another son, Ptolemy Philadelphus. All three were fathered by Antony. Cleopatra now had a dynasty that tied her bloodline to both Caesar and Antony. Egypt under Cleopatra. This is a side of Cleopatra's reign that often gets overshadowed by the drama of her romances. She wasn't just focused on Roman politics, she actually governed. Egypt at this time was wealthy, thanks to the fertile Nile Valley. But it was also fragile. Cleopatra worked to stabilize the economy by managing grain exports carefully, building trade links with Arabia and India, and supporting Egyptian farmers. She reduced taxes in hard times to keep her people loyal. She also invested in religion. By presenting herself as Isis, she blended Greek and Egyptian traditions. In temples, she appeared in full pharaonic regalia, carved in hieroglyphics like her predecessors. She may have been Greek by blood, but she positioned herself as the true pharaoh of Egypt, a ruler in direct connection with the gods. The donations of Alexandria. By the mid-30s BCE, Antony's and Cleopatra's partnership shook the Roman world. In 34 BCE, they staged an event called the Donations of Alexandria. At this spectacle, they sat on golden thrones with their children beside them. Antony declared that Cleopatra was Queen of Kings, and that Caesarion was the true son of Julius Caesar. Their children were given titles over eastern territories Rome had conquered. To Octavian and his supporters in Rome, this was outrageous. Antony was supposed to be a Roman general serving Rome, not handing out kingdoms to foreign children. Even worse, Octavian used propaganda to say Antony wanted to make Cleopatra queen of Rome itself. The idea of a foreign woman ruling Rome horrified traditionalists. This became one of the sparks of the final civil war. The road to Actium. Octavian and Antony's rivalry couldn't last. By 32 BCE, it was open war. Octavian declared Antony a traitor and portrayed Cleopatra as the true enemy. Roman propaganda turned her into a witch, a seductress who had bewitched Antony and stolen him from his Roman duty. The decisive clash came in 31 BCE at the Battle of Actium, a naval fight off the coast of Greece. Antony and Cleopatra's fleet was large but disorganized. Octavian's admiral, Agrippa, outmaneuvered them. In the middle of the battle, Cleopatra's ship suddenly retreated. Ancient sources disagree on why. Some say it was planned, others claim she panicked. Antony broke off and followed her, abandoning his fleet. Without its leaders, Antony's navy collapsed. Octavian had won. The fall of Alexandria. After Actium, Octavian advanced on Egypt. By 30 BCE, Antony and Cleopatra were trapped in Alexandria. Their power was gone. Their allies had abandoned them. In his final days, Antony tried to rally, but when he heard false news that Cleopatra was dead, he fell on his sword. Mortally wounded, he was carried to her mausoleum, where he died in her arms. Cleopatra now faced a choice: surrender and be paraded through Rome as Octavian's trophy, or die on her own terms. She chose death. The traditional story is that she allowed a venomous asp, a snake sacred to Egypt, to bite her. But ancient sources give other versions. Some say it was poison hidden in a hairpin or ointment. However it happened, Cleopatra died at age 39. Her attendants Eris and Charmian also took their own lives. Octavian reportedly entered to find her already dead, dressed in royal finery on a golden couch. Aftermath. Octavian had Caesarion killed, ending any rival claim as Caesar's son. Cleopatra's 3 children with Antony were taken to Rome. Cleopatra Selene eventually married King Juba II of Mauritania and became a queen in her own right. The fate of her brothers is less clear. With Cleopatra's death, Egypt became a Roman province. The Ptolemaic dynasty was over. Octavian returned to Rome in triumph, soon taking the title Augustus, the first Roman emperor. Legacy. Cleopatra's story didn't end with her death. In fact, her legend only grew. For the Romans, she was remembered as the dangerous temptress who brought Antony down. Writers like Plutarch and Dio portrayed her as cunning and manipulative, more sorceress than stateswoman. But for her people, she had been a true pharaoh. She spoke their language, honored their gods, and ruled for over 2 decades. She left a mark that was rare for her dynasty. Over the centuries, artists, playwrights, and poets reimagined her. Shakespeare turned her into a tragic heroine in Antony and Cleopatra. Painters showed her dramatic death. Hollywood turned her into a symbol of beauty and seduction. What often gets forgotten is her brilliance. She wasn't just Rome's lover. She was a ruler who held her throne against overwhelming odds, who knew how to use politics, culture, and image to her advantage. That's why Cleopatra remains one of the most fascinating figures in history. Not because she was beautiful, but because she was unforgettable.